Hello and welcome to a video on the Planet Zach YouTube channel. Welcome to the Sonic Heroes episode of What the Heck is a Sonic Game? You may possibly be thinking, wait, I thought you already covered Sonic Heroes. And you would be right. You would also be one of the 5 people that watched that video. And you may also know that the sound was really bizarrely corrupted when I uploaded it. And so I have decided to retake the whole video. It's for the best though, because there are parts of that video where I sound like an arrogant jerk, and so I'm completely redoing it instead of just re-uploading it. Sonic Heroes was the first game to be released on a non-Sega console in the Sonic series, and as far as game structure goes, it's pretty back to basics. You have 7 different level themes, or zones, if you want to call them that. They aren't really called that in the game, but they're basically zones. And each one has 2 acts. Generally speaking, the first act is a little bit less challenging than the second act, and the second act normally ends with some kind of overall final challenge. There are some exceptions to this, namely Bullet Station, which doesn't truly end with any kind of big challenge. But for the most part, you can expect some kind of challenging thing at the end of the second act, and then each set of stages is punctuated by some kind of boss fight. There are 3 types of boss fights in the game. The first is facing off against another team. The second is facing off against some kind of Eggman robot contraption. And the other type of boss fight that you'll find in this game is going in against waves after waves of robots. And that's pretty much the standard, and then the final boss is another Eggman battle. Now you may be asking, what could you have possibly said in the original video that's so spicy? And really, it's just my response to a hot take I found in another person's video. The YouTuber ChowMix did a collab video where he posited the idea that Sonic Heroes is actually some kind of puzzle game, due to the fact that not a lot of people are completely 100% understanding of how the mechanics work. But I think that that's giving the game a little bit too much credit and discrediting the players a little bit too much. Because, while it does have a sort of rock, paper, scissors approach to how you use the team abilities, it doesn't just throw you to the wolves. If you actually listen to everything the characters are saying and all the different things that happen in the stage gimmicks, you should eventually learn how this system of combat and team usage works. It is, in my opinion, the best example of multiple playable characters in the Sonic series to date. So let's go over it for a bit, shall we? This game is divided into 4 different stories that are played through as teams of 3. Each team has powers which are based mainly on the abilities of Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails, who are the first team to appear on the screen where you can select the team to play as. They are kind of the middle range difficulty of the game, and they will be the characters you're probably going to play as first, because it's a Sonic game, obviously. So, to go over each character's abilities, Sonic's abilities are based on his speed. He also has the elemental abilities based on wind, like the Blue Tornado. It's a move that you can use to knock enemies off their feet. It stops you in your tracks, but speedrunners have actually figured out you can use it to gain a little bit of extra height in your jump. Then if you ever need to do anything that involves flying, you're going to want to switch over to Tails. He can do some platforming that's a little bit more challenging because it's got farther platforms apart. And if you want to get the best mileage out of his flight, then you're going to want to jump and wait until you reach as far as you can with your initial jump before you go ahead and press the button again to fly, because that will get you a lot more distance than just jumping and then flying immediately. Tails' elemental abilities are based on electricity, and so he has a move called Thunder Shoot where he can shoot Sonic or Knuckles at the enemy to stun or kill them, and that's electricity based. Finally, we have Knuckles, who uses his strength. He's a power character. He can break through walls that can be broken. He can destroy robots a little bit easier than some of the other characters, and overall he's a very powerful character, and all of his abilities are based on fire. And each of these ability types and elemental types hold true for all of the characters on each team. There's a power, speed, and fly character on each of the 4 teams. I'll linger on this graphic one moment longer while I explain the level system. Each character starts the stage at level 0 basically, their baseline, and that's the weakest the character can be. But each time you pass a checkpoint or find one of the special cores, the character levels up. The cores are color-coded for each ability type, and each character can level up to 3 times. They are at their most powerful at level 3, and the levels below that are steps of gradual increase in power and ability. Tails can fly farther, Knuckles can punch harder, Sonic's homing attack and speed increase their power, and the same holds true for the other teams as well. So that's Team Sonic covered, but what about the other teams? Next up we have Team Dark, consisting of Rouge, Shadow, and newcomer Omega, who is one of Eggman's robots. He was sealed in a room to guard Shadow in a stasis pod, and he is angry with Eggman and wants revenge. So he turns on Eggman just like Gamma did in Sonic Adventure. This team is considered the hardest team to play as in the game. They have a little bit more challenging things to get through in each stage. The layouts are relatively similar to the ones you find in Team Sonic's run, but they will just have a few extra challenges here and there. Next up we have Team Rose, consisting of Amy, Cream the Rabbit, and Big the Cat. Cream the Rabbit was first appeared in a console game here after originally originating from the Sonic Advance series on Game Boy Advance, and she also appeared in the Sonic X anime. Big the Cat is back from Sonic Adventure, and they are all trying to find Sonic because they think that he has stolen Froggy and Chocolachow. And of course, Amy is still obsessed with Sonic, so they tail after him. They're a bit in over their heads, but they generally have the easiest routes through the stages, and their stages are normally relatively shorter than the other teams. Then the last team is our wild card, Team Chaotix. This is the Chaotix Detective Agency, consisting of leader and power character Vector, the speed character is Espio the Chameleon, and the fly character is Charmy Bee. These characters are based on the Chaotix characters from the game Knuckles Chaotix. These are not the same characters from that game, but different versions of the characters with similar designs and the same names. This will be important to remember going forward. A lot of the characters in this series will have multiple versions depending on what continuity we're dealing with. I think it's kind of the first case we had of this, because up until that point, even classic Sonic and modern Sonic, or I guess really Dreamcast era Sonic, were considered the same character, even though today Sega largely wants us to consider them to be separate characters. But this isn't the first time they've done that. In fact, a lot of characters have been given different versions across different games and even different media. These characters appear in a lot of the comics, and they are vastly different between the comics and the games, and even different comic runs had different characterizations for these characters. And that's just kind of the way this works. I don't know if it happens as much like this in other franchises, but basically anybody who is creating a Sonic story is able to interpret their character in a little bit different way from the way they're presented in other media some of the time. Some of the time, Sega gets really uptight about different characterization elements, and that can lead to some pretty unfortunate things happening to certain characters, but it's not uncommon to see different versions of the same character between different games. After that long tangent, you're probably wondering how Team Chaotix plays. Well, it's simple. Their gameplay is the precursor to the mission-style gameplay of Shadow the Hedgehog. Each stage sees you having a different mission. There's one or two of these where the only goal is to get to the end, but for the most part, you're collecting things or finding keys, things like that. So these are the kinds of missions you can expect from Team Chaotix, which makes it so it's really hard to classify them as either an easy or harder team to play as than the others, because the gameplay is very different. But the stages are almost identical to the other stages. The stages are not designed specifically around this gameplay, which can make it a bit of a chore to find things that you've missed in the route. It's worth noting that there were more teams planned for the game. We were going to see a team that used Mighty and maybe even Ray. Metal Sonic was originally going to be one of the playable characters instead of being one of the antagonists. And Gamma was even going to make a return, which sounds very odd. It would have been another case of a character who we saw die on screen coming back, which we already had one of those with Shadow. If you're interested in all the lore surrounding Shadow and his apparent death in Sonic Adventure 2, I would recommend watching my Shadow the Hedgehog video. I go into more detail about why Shadow comes back and why the whole Shadow the Hedgehog game is the way it is. I'm really proud of that video, so I hope you like it. I've also heard, I think, that Chaos may have been planned as a playable character at some point. Who knows how many teams they would have added if they'd been given the time. So that's the basics of the team structure of the gameplay laid out. And I personally think it's one of the best multiple player character scenarios that we ever gotten out of the series. The team system is not perfect. You've got characters that are missing abilities that they had in the past, such as Knuckles' climbing ability being stripped and his gliding ability being turned into the triangle dive, which is an odd thing. I also think it's interesting because Omega also has triangle dive, which makes me wonder if he was supposed to also have a gliding ability, and that's what that implies. It's also strange because even though Knuckles and Rouge played exactly the same in Sonic Adventure 2, they are separate ability types in this game, with Knuckles being power and Rouge being a fly character. So like I said, an imperfect system, but one that I enjoy nonetheless. If you want any further proof that it is a very good system, just look at games like Sonic World that have implemented the system, that are fan games, and the ability types are really important, and Sonic World doesn't use that, but you even see them appear in games like Sonic Riders. They distinguish characters from one another and give you alternate abilities to play through as, versus games like Sonic World, where every character can technically be played in a stage, and there's no type distinguishing them from another. Sure, you get a case where there are certain alternative routes to take through the stage in Sonic Heroes, but that's not the main meat. You're intentionally guided and expected to switch between the characters to get through certain parts of the stage. There are certain times where you won't even be able to progress if you are using the wrong character, for the most part. You can do your best to cheese through the stages as one of the characters. A lot of people try to get through the entire stage as Sonic, but that's really not how the stages were designed, and you are going to run into some issues there and won't probably have as good of a time as you could if you are able to learn the team system. It's really not that hard to understand once you get down to the basics, and if you get good at it, you can keep a pretty good flow through the level and not really have any slowdown, and I think that's brilliant. As much as I like the Sonic Adventure games, they are not without their own flaws, and I would personally rather see the Heroes gameplay style be revisited rather than the Sonic Adventure or Sonic Adventure 2 style being revisited, just because I love this game so much, and I'm really not that happy that it hasn't really been re-released on other platforms, but I do have a way to play it, which is nice, and it's really one of my favorite games that I played as a kid, one of the only Sonic games that I played when I was young, And while it has developed a reputation for being a bit rough around the edges, I love it to death. And I will say this, I played the PC version, which is arguably one of the worst versions that there was, and I was still able to get through most of Sonic's story just fine. Team Sonic's story. I got stuck on the Mystic Mansion altar section because I didn't realize that there was a little bit of a cooldown period between homing attacks. You can't spam the homing attack in this game as well as you can in other games, which some people might prefer. I personally just like if you can just go at it mashing the button, but you have to wait a moment before hitting it again or it won't necessarily work out how you intended. So I kept falling to my death. And imagine my surprise when that whole section was completely different and didn't even include homing attacking those ghosts in the quote-unquote hard mode of Team Dark. That was something else. So anyways, I really like this game, and I think you would like it if you gave it a try, if you happen to be a Sonic fan. If you can get your hands on a playable copy and a way to play it, I would highly recommend it. Anyways, that's where I'm going to wrap up this video for now. If you enjoyed the video, consider interacting with it in some way. And if you liked it enough, consider subscribing. I mostly put out content for my own benefit, but I have opinions and ideas that I want to share with the world, and the more people that get to see it, the happier that makes me. So, until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.